At 0500 hours local time, 6 Beaver drones took off from Kiran, heading for a Russian airbase north of Sevastopol that housed several uncommon BE-12 aircraft. A Russian Tor M2 system 12 kilometers distant spotted them right away, its radar technician observing 6 blips appear on his display. What he was unaware of was that 6 drones versus 16 missiles appeared as poor chances. But the Ukrainians weren't gambling on chances, they were engaging in an entirely separate strategy. The initial duo of Beavers ascended close to the Dnipro, their electric engines drawing peak power, an electromagnetic howl that illuminated every radar within 20 kilometers. That was deliberate. These 2 drones served as the diversion, similar to a conjurer flourishing one hand theatrically while the other performs the actual flight. 30 seconds afterward, a second duo departed near Berislav, remaining low, their infrared sensors converting the shadowy environment into a monochromatic depiction of warmth and chill. The last duo lingered, motors heated yet still ticking on a schedule established weeks prior by a mission designer who realized that air defense setups, like individuals, could only concentrate on so many issues simultaneously. The Tor leader confronted an unfeasible decision: 16 missiles, 6 objectives. Protocol indicated 2 missiles per objective for a 90% chance of elimination. That implied he ought to be capable of knocking all these out without issue, but the Ukrainians had alternative schemes. The radar displayed the drones dispersing, each duo adopting a distinct path. The northern duo rose to 500 meters, bold, conspicuous, essentially yelling, "Target me," in the electromagnetic dialect. The central duo remained at 100 meters, proceeding directly south, as if indifferent to the Tor whatsoever. The southern duo truly veered southwest, away from Crimea, away from any sensible objective. It lacked strategic logic, but this is where matters become intriguing. The launcher rotated north and raised. 2 9M338 missiles burst from their canisters. Within each missile, a processor tinier than a mobile device, computing intercept trajectories, gauging approach speeds, forecasting where 2 drones moving 150 kilometers per hour would be in 28 seconds. For the initial 8 seconds, the missiles traveled unguided, adhering to directives from the base unit. Up, up, stabilize, minor left. Then their sensors activated, X-band radar saturating the atmosphere, hunting for their quarry. The northern Beavers had anticipated this precise instant, the moment their radar alert systems sensed the change from scan to lock mode. That surge rose from 300 to 1,800 pulses per second. They plummeted, not a mild drop, an abrupt nosedive toward the ground, exchanging height for endurance. The missiles attempted to pursue, but they'd been set for an elevated intercept. Abruptly, they were descending at 60 degrees, their guidance fins wailing in the airflow, exerting 30 Gs to execute a maneuver they weren't built for. At 20 meters height, low enough to touch road markers if any existed, the Beavers flattened out. High above, 2 highly costly missiles were undergoing a profound dilemma. Their sensors, meant to identify aircraft against clear heavens, were now facing terrain interference. Every fence pole, every metallic rooftop, every water pool bounced back radar signals. The Doppler processors attempted to distinguish mobile from immobile, but at Mach 2.5, the missiles were advancing too swiftly to handle the echoes. It resembled attempting to peruse a book while dashing through a bookstore. 12 seconds post-activation, both missiles surrendered. Their processors, concluding no legitimate objective was present, initiated auto-detonation. Following their failure, the Tor team redirected their focus to the southern duo. There was merely one issue: the southern duo had vanished. Not actually, drones don't simply disappear, but to the Tor's radar they could have just as well warped away. The southern duo had executed something mundanely ingenious. They'd found a breach. The Tor's radar was positioned on a mild elevation, providing superb visibility to the north, south, and east, but to the southwest, a soft depression formed a radar blind area beginning at 3 kilometers from the unit. This functions because all radars possess dead zones, locations where landscape or the planets bend, or merely the principles of electromagnetic propagation generate obscurations. The drone controllers examining orbital images and height charts for weeks had identified this breach. It measured only 400 meters across at surface level, tapering as you ascended. Over 50 meters, the Tor could see all. Under 30 meters, foliage and structures posed their own challenges. But from 30 to 50 meters, for precisely 400 meters of side-to-side expanse, that's lateral span from right to left, the Tor was sightless. The southern duo navigated this tight spot at 35 meters elevation, their pilots guiding by GPS points committed to memory like a mantra. One error of judgment, one breeze shoving them 200 meters off course, they'd appear on the Tor display like glowing beacons. But Ukrainian drone pilots had been navigating tight spots for 3 years already. This was merely another shift on duty. If your duty entailed steering bombs through unseen holes in anti-air grids. The central duo, meanwhile, faced issues unique to them. With the leader busy with the missing southern duo, the backup technicians stepped up. 2 additional missiles exited the launchers. These were configured for ground-level takedown right away. No ascending to upper heights initially. These armaments charged directly ahead, speeding sideways like guided projectiles. The central duo of Beavers sensed the firing and executed a move absent from any handbook, whether Russian or Ukrainian. They pivoted toward the Tor straight on, full power. Descending to build velocity, they directed themselves at the system like homing weapons themselves. This wasn't bravery, it was calculation. The Tor M2, despite its advanced features, had been engineered in the 2000s to counter 1990s dangers. Cruise missiles, assault helicopters, jet fighters. No one in the Russian engineering team had envisioned protecting against 6 hobbyist drones. They particularly hadn't pictured those drones charging directly at the system. Every anti-air setup has a shortest intercept distance, the nearest point where it can reliably hit an enemy. For the Tor, that was 1 kilometer. Any nearer and the missiles couldn't prime their explosives soon enough. Safety procedures meant to stop the missile from exploding too close to the system wouldn't allow it. It was like a fighter with extended reach, battling an opponent who kept clinching. All that extension turns worthless when your rival is within your defense. The central duo of Beavers would hit that 1 kilometer zone in 36 seconds. The missiles, already airborne, had been set to strike at 3 kilometers. Now their processors were desperately recomputing, attempting to figure out how to strike foes that were rushing towards the system rather than fleeing it. The missiles sought to flip direction, enduring such intense forces their structures creaked. One missile's steering fin truly detached, hurling the armament spinning across the dark heavens like a 100-kilogram garden spear. The other missile succeeded in reversing, but encountered a second problem. It was now pursuing foes heading towards its origin point. If it persisted, it would soar right above its own unit. The safety measures activated once more. No Russian armament was allowed to threaten its own system. The device auto-exploded 800 meters from the Tor, near enough that the team sensed the shockwave. The Beavers continued onward, their basic electric engines buzzing in the darkness. They'd overcome one of Russia's most sophisticated anti-air setups, not via invisibility or interference or any advanced gadgetry, but via numbers and science, the sort of strategic ingenuity that arises from having scarcer assets than your opponent. The only issue is Russia possesses a massive pile of assets, which the drones would shortly discover personally. The 6 Beavers entered controlled southern Ukraine at 0517 hours, and right away everything became tougher. The Buk M3 at Nova Kakhovka had been watching them for 6 minutes, tracking their thermal traces through its 9S-36 radar while they were still dealing with the tour. This wasn't some roving team surprised. This was a ready sight with a leader who'd been combating drones for 3 years and had the evidence to show it. The Buk fired without alert, no probing radar scan, no locking stage, just immediate missiles aloft. But something varied about these firings. The missiles didn't curve up into their standard arcing path. They stayed level, flat, racing directly at the drones at canopy level. The Buk was using its special tactic, track-through missile, where the missile itself turned into a remote radar link, stretching the site's vision by 40 kilometers past what land-based gear could detect. Consider that briefly. The missile was rushing at you at Mach 2.5, and during that it was also illuminating you with radar and telling the base station exactly where you were. It was pursuer and scout merged, a 700-kilogram airborne radar outpost that concluded its task by detonating near you. The Ukrainian pilots, viewing via their camera links, had precisely 18 seconds to devise an answer, or their drones would turn into very tiny fragments of very pricey composite material. The head Beaver's pilot noticed rescue in the shape of a grain silo, one of those huge cement structures that scatter the Ukrainian terrain like factory peaks. The drone plunged sharply, swapping height for velocity, targeting the slim space between the silo and its packing plant. The missile attempted to track, its guidance nose fixed, sending location revisions every tenth of a second back to the Buk site. But missiles meant to obliterate combat planes weren't constructed for city mazes. The missile burst into the ground beneath, launching a plume of fumes into the atmosphere. Through the fumes, 5 beavers surfaced. One had been snagged by fragments. A slab of metal the size of a cooler had nicked its wing, hurling it spinning into a meadow where it detonated in a surprisingly tiny blaze. But the drones wouldn't allow Russians even this minor triumph. The Buk leader viewed his monitor with the look of someone who's just been tricked at poker but couldn't demonstrate it. His setup could monitor 36 foes at once, attack 6, and had a response time counted in milliseconds. But the beavers weren't adhering to the guidelines he'd studied at Anti-Air Academy. This is where matters become fascinating. The 3 drones intersect routes, not close to one another, truly intersecting, their radar echoes blending into one mass before dividing once more. The Buk's processor, attempting to keep separate locks, had to repeatedly recompute. Is drone A now on the left or right? Did B ascend or descend? The computing delay was only 1.2 seconds per recomputation. But when you're following 5 foes that continued exchanging spots, that equaled 3.6 seconds of disarray every 7 seconds. It was like attempting to track a pea dame where the peas shift themselves. That's when they deployed something that ought to have succeeded, since the Buk 3's visual electronic reserve system was superb. In sunlight at 0520 hours in the early morning gloom, it couldn't truly distinguish the beavers from the dawn mist. The infrared viewing mode could detect the beavers' warmth marks, but only at 8 kilometers distance. By the time the drones showed as dim, pale spots against the cool soil, they were already within the shortest intercept range. The Buk switched to radio quiet as they went by. Not damaged, not disrupted, just conceding loss with expert poise. The leader broadcast his update: 5 UAVs proceeding south, incapable of attacking due to mechanical restrictions. Mechanical restrictions, armed forces jargon for "they tricked us." But Russia anticipated that. At 0535 hours, the drones stepped into the S-400's realm, and the S-400 didn't mess around. This setup had been engineered to smack hypersonic rockets from orbit to extend 400 kilometers and erase anything that soared. Its 92 N6E Tombstone radar could track a tennis ball at 200 kilometers, and its 48 N6DM missiles could endure 20 Gs while moving at Mach 14. Battling drones with an S-400 was like pursuing gnats with a marksman gun, excessive but still lethal if it hit. The S-400 at Sevastopol had an issue, though, a comical, humiliating, secret issue that some coder in 2007 had made and no one had corrected. The system's speed threshold sieve, the program that divided actual foes from foul and climate, had been fixed to disregard anything traveling below 100 kilometers per hour. Not changeable, not bypassable, etched into the storage like an ink you acquired in university and can't pay to erase. 3 drones reduced to precisely 95 kilometers an hour. To the S-400's trillion-dollar mind, they ceased being. They turned into avians, irregularities, detector phantoms not meriting analysis. The radar technician observed blips flash on and off his display like a faulty television station. There one scan, absent the nexting, present again but in the incorrect location. But the fact is, S-400s never operate solo. Since their extend distance resources, they also possess close-range teams like Panzers guarding them. And now, Panzer units were relocating from Sevastopol toward Kerch, ultimately determining where the drones were directed. In 8 minutes, the airfield would be shielded by local protection setups created especially to demolish drones. The contest was underway. Then the Russian army's own air force stepped in. An armed transport from Moscow to Sevastopol started its landing at precisely 0541 hours, a totally standard staff transport hauling 180 soldiers nearing on the precise course the Beavers required to follow toward Kerch. The S-400 couldn't fire within 5 kilometers of a non-combat or armed beacon, another fixed security that averted the sorts of events that terminated jobs and initiated conflicts. The 3 Beavers slipped in along the plane's landing route like chicks trailing their parent, not close enough to pose risk, but close enough that any rocket strike would activate every safeguard rule in the Russian anti-air grid. For 8 splendid minutes, they possessed an impenetrable barrier crafted from legal risks and international mishap avoidance. The Russian anti-air chief was yelling into his comms, insisting the plane be rerouted. Flight oversight was yelling in return that you couldn't simply alter routes without reason. The Russian aviators were puzzled why all were shouting at them when they were merely attempting to touch down on time. By the moment all ceased yelling and began reasoning, the Beavers had exited the S-400's strike area and were plunging toward Kerch at top velocity. In their wake, the plane proceeded its descent and touched down securely, totally oblivious that they had fulfilled such a vital part in breaching Russia's anti-air setup. But amid those 8 minutes, the Panzers had covered the 2 kilometers north to Kerch airfield. The Panzer S-1 reached Kerch at 0546 hours, its team still attempting to extend the support legs while the sensor was already hunting for foes. This wasn't the proper way to position an anti-air unit. The guide required 5 minutes of preparation, exiting the transport, tuning the sensor, heating the targeting controls. They had perhaps 90 seconds before the Beavers showed. Skip the legs, the chief decided. We'll fire from the tires. Firing from the tires meant 60% precision at most. The transport would sway with each gun salvo, the sensor would drop precise lock, and the rockets might not steer correctly. But 60% of anything was superior to 100% of zilch, and zilch was what the BE-12s possessed for protection except the lone Panzer that wasn't even intended to be present. The sensor marked 3 blips nearing from the northeast at 180 kilometers an hour, height 400 meters and dropping. The Panzer had 12 57E6 rockets and 1,400 shots of 30mm ammo, ample to wipe out 5 drones if all functioned flawlessly. Nothing functioned flawlessly. The initial rocket fired and promptly swerved left, its steering mechanism baffled by the transport's unsteady base. It auto-exploded after traveling 800 meters in the incorrect path. The next rocket locked stronger, speeding toward the front Beaver and shattered it and the Beaver trailing it from the heavens. Now within the rocket's shortest strike zone, the Panzer's dual 30mm guns unleashed, saturating the morning heavens with glowing rounds that resembled deadly party ribbons. The weapons were built to form a barrier of metal that planes couldn't penetrate. But the Beavers weren't penetrating. They were maneuvering past, above, below, anywhere except linear. The technician was attempting to lock foes while his transport jolted from the gun kickback. His aiming cursor jumped like a hyperactive rodent. 2 minutes of non-stop shooting, 800 shots used, 0 strikes. 10 seconds afterward, the initial Beaver attained its final plunge spot. The pilot, back in Ukraine, observing via an infrared sensor that had miraculously endured 3 hours of journey through chaos, aligned his sights on the BE-12. The plane rested there, chilled and vulnerable, its unique golden wings rendering it appear like a dozing shorebird that was set to receive the harshest alarm in records. The plunge tilt was 40 degrees, pace 210 kilometers an hour when the collision happened. The FPV-style penetrating explosive didn't merely burst, it directed all its force into a stream of liquid metal moving 8,000 meters per second. This stream pierced the BE-12's light metal hull like it didn't exist, through the gas reservoirs like they were crafted of tissue, and into the service lot of plane fuel stationed amid the 2 planes that no one had troubled to shift. The blast was comprehensive, to put it mildly. The next Beaver struck the Mi-8 chopper 1.2 seconds after. This strike was less dramatic but more total. The penetrating explosive struck the weapon depot straight. For the following 30 seconds, 12.7mm shells ignited like the planet's most furious snack, hurling projectiles everywhere. The Panzer, still attempting to strike the third drone, absorbed multiple strikes to its sensor grid, basically disabling it. The third Beaver looped once, its sensor capturing the wreckage for records, then plunged into the next BE-12, where it quickly turned into the newest social media share of the Ukrainian intel. See you later.